Imagine someone who has never seen water in their entire life. No pond, no lake, no mountain stream, nothing. And then one day a friend says to him, "You know what? You should really learn how to swim. Swimming is fantastic." So what does the friend do? He takes him out on his motorboat. They head straight out into the open sea. The water is deep, dark blue, and the ocean floor, hundreds of meters below them, you can only imagine it. Then the friend jumps in. He swims once around the boat, dives under briefly, comes back up and shouts, "See, easy, that's your turn." Meanwhile, the non-swimmer is leaning over the edge of the boat, looking down into the water, and he sees something moving just beneath the surface. A strange triangular shape. "What's that?" he asks. "Oh, that," the friend says. "That's nothing. Just a minor detail. We'll deal with the details later. First, you need to get into action." Now tell me, do you think that's a good way to learn how to swim? Do you think the non-swimmer is going to throw himself joyfully into the waves and think, "Yes, this is efficient. This makes perfect sense"? And yet, this is exactly what we often do in language classrooms. We put people into lesson 1. We give them a few sentences, maybe a couple of rules, and then we say, "All right, now it's your turn. Introduce yourself, start speaking," before they've ever really been in the water, before they've developed a feeling for depth, a feeling for currents, for temperature. Nobody learns to swim by studying the theory of buoyancy. But you also don't learn it by fighting for your life in the open sea. Unless, of course, you confuse staying afloat with actually swimming. Real swimming begins with becoming familiar with the element of water. You step in, you feel it, you notice how it carries you, how it resists you, how your body reacts. And only then does the water slowly become deeper. Language acquisition works in exactly the same way. Before we speak, we have to become familiar with the element of language, with its rhythm, its melody, with its specific sounds, with its recurring patterns. Only when perception is stable does production become meaningful. Speaking is not the beginning of language acquisition. Let me say that again. Speaking is not the beginning. Listening is. Of course, people speak in the first lesson of a language course. They say, "Hello, how are you?" Or, "Good afternoon, I'm Pedro, I'm from Mexico." But what is actually happening there? Is that already language production? Strictly speaking, no. It's imitation. It's a tentative exploration of new sounds that feel somehow strange in the mouth. It's actually very similar to what babies do in the babbling stage. And I don't mean that in a dismissive way. Absolutely not. Babbling is a remarkably sophisticated process. A baby tests its muscles. It experiments with the lips, with the tongue and the palate. It explores what its voice can do. And crucially, it does all of this within a rich social context. When a baby babbles, we smile, we respond, we interact. That feedback loop is part of what drives the process forward. When adults repeat, "Hello, how are you?" in the first lesson, the mechanism is similar. They reproduce what they hear. They imitate the teacher or the audio recording. They train the muscles in their mouth. And that's fine, absolutely fine. But it's not yet language competence. It's not free speech. Nothing is wrong with imitation. It only becomes a problem when we pretend that this is already speaking. When we believe someone can speak simply because they can reproduce sounds. Real language production requires something deeper. It requires a feeling for the sound system of the language. What linguists call the phoneme inventory. That simply means which sounds does a language actually use as meaningful distinctions. Different languages use different sound contrasts, and we perceive sounds through the filter of our native language. We hear especially well those contrasts that are meaningful in our own system. Foreign sounds are often distorted or not properly differentiated at all. And if we don't perceive a contrast, we cannot reliably produce it. This becomes very clear in a famous Berlitz commercial. You might know it, but let's take a look again.
Das hier ist mein Sektor. Das hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Küstenwächters. Das Gerät und das Gerät. Überlebensradar.
Mayday, Mayday. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about?
So, one sound, different meaning. And the problem here is not bad pronunciation. The real problem is faulty perception. If a sound does not exist in your own phoneme inventory, your brain automatically assigns it to the closest familiar category. That's not laziness, and it's not incompetence. It's a completely normal cognitive process. And in my experience, this is something learners almost never realize. They think they are mispronouncing something, but very often they are mishearing it. Now, maybe you think the Coast Guard example is exaggerated. Maybe you're thinking, well, come on, that's just obvious. Of course there's a difference between thinking and sinking. And that reaction actually proves the point. Because for you, that contrast is crystal clear. You cannot imagine not hearing it. So let me give you a different example. Listen carefully.
Siphon, 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 siphon.
What did you hear? How many words did you hear? Did you hear one word or two different ones? Let's try again.
Siphon, 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 siphon.
How many different words were there? There were two. And the two words mean summer and sword. But if you don't speak Arabic, they probably sounded identical or almost identical.
Siphon, siphon.
For an Arab speaker, however, they are as different as land and sand, or think and sink. And this is exactly what I see again and again in language classrooms. Learners try to produce sounds correctly they cannot yet reliably hear. If I cannot hear the contrast, I cannot pronounce it, of course. And that's why language acquisition begins with auditory differentiation, not with vocabulary lists, not with conjugation tables. But this principle doesn't just apply to individual sounds, it applies to grammar as well. A 5-year-old child already masters the grammar of their native language remarkably well. Before they have ever learned a single rule, no one sits down at a dinner table with a toddler and says, "Repeat after me. I go, you go, he goes. Ich gehe, du gehst, er geht. Ich gehe, du gehst, er geht. Repeat after me. And yet children produce correct forms. The usual explanation is this. Children are naturally gifted at language. They are in a special acquisition window. They learn effortlessly. But that explanation is incomplete. I think children do not learn effortlessly. They learn continuously. They learn because they are immersed. Let's be realistic. A child between the ages of 2 and 6 is awake roughly 10 to 12 hours per day. If we take an average of 11 hours, that's about 4,000 hours of exposure per year. Over 4 years, that's roughly 16,000 hours. And during those hours, they are constantly surrounded by language. At home, in daycare, with siblings, with adults, they cannot opt out. They are immersed whether they like it or not. Now, of course, no adult has that kind of time. But the principle still holds. The more meaningful input, the more stable the foundation. The question is not whether we can replicate childhood, but whether we can work with the same mechanism, just more deliberately. What happens during those thousands of hours of exposure? Children hear grammatical patterns thousands of times, 10,000s of times even. Their brains register frequency. They notice what occurs often, and they notice what almost never occurs. This process is called statistical learning. The brain tracks how often patterns occur and builds expectations from that. And I see this constantly when learners suddenly say, "Oh, that just sounds right." They don't know the rule, but the pattern has stabilized. If a child hears "I was" thousands of times and never hears "I was't," stability emerges. Not because the child memorized a rule, but because the pattern became overwhelmingly frequent. This does not mean grammar is irrelevant. Children possess highly complex grammatical knowledge, but it's implicit. Implicit means it works, but it is not consciously accessible. Explicit grammar, on the other hand, means consciously formulating rules, and explicit grammar can be very helpful. But the sequence matters. Implicit grammar comes first. Explicit grammar comes second. And in my experience, when that order is reversed, learning becomes harder than it needs to be. Explicit grammar without an implicit foundation is like theory without experience. It's like trying to teach someone how to ride a bicycle by explaining gravity, balance, and momentum. All of that is correct, yes, but no one learns to ride a bicycle by understanding a formula. You learn by feeling the balance, and only later can you explain why it works. So we don't begin with rules. We begin with listening, with perception, with rhythm, with sound distinctions, with recurring patterns. Because only when these patterns are anchored implicitly does grammar become stable. And only then does explicit grammar truly make sense. Language doesn't begin in the mouth, it begins in the ear. If perception is unstable, production is unstable. And that's why listening comes first. That's the foundation of everything I do here. Now you might be thinking, well, that's fine for children, but adults don't have 16,000 hours. And you're right, of course they don't. But what if that's not the real issue? In deep dive number 2, we'll explore the advantages adult learners actually have and how to use them strategically.